Hey everybody, normally I'm doing my lesson videos on Tuesdays, but I thought I would add an additional video per week, and that's going to hopefully be part of a series, which is going to be based on the book by Jim Chapin called Advanced Techniques for the Modern Drummer. This book, it was really integral for my playing. It was basically a linchpin in just me getting used to playing not only independence in general, but jazz independence and bebop independence, and was pretty much what helped me develop my abilities enough that I could get into college for drums one day. I have a lot of students that are studying with me presently who, because of doing online videos, have a hard time maybe sometimes grasping some of these parts under their, kind of getting that under their belt. So I thought I'd do these videos for them and for anybody else who's interested in knowing more about this book and just applying jazz independence to their playing on the drum set. So even if you're not a jazz player or familiar too much with the style of playing jazz, a lot of these concepts are going to be very, very important to you, just being able to develop your overall techniques and abilities on the drums in many other styles and forms. So the first important thing to remember when playing the exercises in this book is that it's going to be centered around jazz ride pattern. So basically your swing, stereotypical swing pattern happening in the ride cymbal. And even though it's not notated within the book, but doing hi-hat on 2 and 4. So if I were doing a medium swing tempo, essentially just this type of pattern. So that's 1, 2, a 3, 4, a 1, 2, a 3, 4, a 1, 2, a 3, 4. And basically the figures that are going to be found in the book, if you have a copy of the book, you can follow along. In fact, I highly recommend getting a copy of the book. It would make understanding a lot of these parts and concepts that much easier for you to comprehend. But all the figures that are going to be played, best represent what we would normally do when we're playing, kind of like our stereotypical type of swing pattern. So for anybody not familiar with the term, what I'm doing basically between my left hand and my right foot is comping. There's really a two-pronged meaning to this. It either represents complementing or accompaniment. So the idea when we play jazz, our comping is complementing what's happening in the playing around us. So if we're supporting a soloist or we're playing behind a melody, we can play parts within our snare and our kick patterns that better emulate what's happening in the melody or support what the soloist is doing. If you haven't listened to jazz before, a lot of this terminology and a lot of the concept, it's really going to get lost on you until you listen to the music. So I highly recommend going and listening to more jazz in general. And then the other term being complementing. So, again, that idea of supporting a soloist is to complement what they're doing in their instrument. So similar to if you're having a conversation with somebody and instead of just kind of going, yeah, the whole time, sometimes you'll want to respond to them with a question that will make them have a separate set of answers to give you and creating a dialogue. So comping is also good for creating that musical dialogue between you and the other musicians in the band that you're playing in. For the breakdown of this book, I'm going to be doing 3 things to start off from the very beginning. So the first set of exercises I'm going to go through is going to start off at page, get it for you in a second here. It's going to start off on page 4 of the book. There are, just a quick note, there are very many printings of this book. This copy I have here was a printing from October of 2000, which was the 60th printing of this book. I don't imagine there having been a lot of edits between this printing that I have and any newer printings. That being said, there may be a couple. But essentially, page 4 in this copy I have here is section 1, part A, dotted eighths and sixteenths. Now, even though this is dotted eighths and sixteenths, we're still going to treat this as swung eighth notes, or essentially based on subdividing on triplets. So again, for those that are unaware, the pattern that we're playing in the ride cymbal, even though it's a quarter, dotted eighth, 16th, quarter, dotted eighth, 16th, we'll still have the sound of 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a 1. So we're always subdividing on triplets. The notation is just the variation that's been written in here by Jim. So for each exercise I'm going to play throughout the series, at least in the initial stages, is going to be 3-way coordination to start. Ride cymbal and hi-hat are basically home base. They are your ground level pattern, or what I like to actually call it is your support beam, or your load-bearing part of the pattern. So in other words, that is always going to stay the same. Your ride cymbal pattern and hi-hat on 2 and 4 is always going to be there. As I go through each exercise, I'm going to start out with time, play the figure that's underneath in the snare drum, so my left hand, play for a certain amount of time, probably for the sake of the videos, I'll maybe just do it 4 times, because these patterns will basically go on for a while. Left hand will play the figure 4 times, play time in between. I'll play the figure in the right foot, so my bass drum, 4 times, play time, and then I'll play unison between the snare and the right foot. One reason for doing this is because when you're first learning independence, it's kind of like if you're learning how to juggle. It's probably easier to do it with 2 pins than it is to do it with 3, and subsequently to learn how to do it with 4 pins, you want to learn how to do it with 3 first. So even though we've got 4 limbs, and generally when I'm playing authentic jazz, grooves or feel or time, I've got all 4 limbs involved, I want to start out with only maybe doing 3 at first. When I do the unison pattern at the end, that is a way to introduce our 4th limb. So in other words, even though we're not playing dialogue between the bass drum and the snare, we're still going to be adding that 4th limb in and still technically doing 4-way coordination, or 4-limb independence. But the right foot and the left hand will play the pattern the same way. So for the first set of exercises here, if you want to follow along in your book, I'm going to go number 1 on page 4 all the way through. I have an old copy here, you can tell, all the way through to page 7, number 12. And again, doing snare drum, followed by right foot on the figure, followed by unison between the left hand and the right foot. And just for reference in these videos, or at least for this section here, I'm going to be doing it at 100 beats per minute, just so everybody can follow along enough at home and make sure that they're not getting lost in the patterns. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4.